The Zoo at the Edge of the World. Chapter 29. I tried not to look, but I couldn't turn my back on Deadeyes either, so I ended up watching him swallow Blue Boy whole. There was almost no noise. Deadeyes slowly loosened his jaw away from his skull and slid his mouth and face around the chimp like a sock sliding up a foot. "This is the hardest part," Deadeye said around Blue Boy's body. "My throat has become a bit sensitive in my old age." I didn't respond. The old blind snake bobbed his head back and forth slightly above the floor. It was the first time I'd ever gotten a good look at his face. Black, pebbled skin radiated from his sharp snout, and small shadings of yellow and orange lurked between the scales. When he spoke, I could see the double rows of sharp teeth, one following the line of his lips, like most animals, and one leading down his throat. His eyes were withered and gray, lacking the strange glow most snakes had. They'd been scratched out years ago and were dead things now. He was silent and listened for me to respond. "You don't need to be afraid of me, Marlin. I do not care about a jaguar, not your father." Again, I didn't respond. Without moving my shoulders, I craned my neck toward the staff room in the back of the snake house. If the door was open, I could race there and slam it shut behind me. Someone will come for me eventually, I thought. Unless everyone forgot about me and ran off. Then I'll starve there, but I'd rather starve than be snake food. My neck muscles strained as I flexed them to their limits. I stared and squinted. The door was closed. I'd slammed it shut when I dragged the stool out. Deadeyes would be slowed by the meal still in him. If I made a straight run for the staff room, I could unlock the door and close it before he caught me. But I need the keys for that. And I'd given those to Kenji, who'd run away with them. For a moment, I cursed Kenji for abandoning me, but I couldn't blame her. This was my fault. "Are you thinking that I'll eat you, Marlin?" Deadeyes laughed. "But I am so full." His tail began to writhe and twist. Between his head and the lump in his neck, the snake was immobile, but the length of his body behind the digesting meal was still active and deadly. "It seems as though the zoo is under new management," he hissed. "I wonder if the monkeys will come to feed me after what I've done to their friend." Deadeyes flexed his neck horribly and moved the blue boy lumped farther down his body. "It doesn't matter," he went on. "This meal will last some weeks. And until then, well, I'm lucky to have you here, Marlin. You may keep me company." His back end slid toward me across the floor like a whip. I pushed against the top of a display case and lifted my feet as the tail swished under me. Silently, I touched the ground, toes first. "Just want to get a grip on you, Marlin." The snake heaved, growing angry. "You know I like a live feeding." Again he swept across the floor with his enormous body. He could have cleared the whole length of the snake house if it hadn't been for the lump anchoring his neck. But he'd find me soon enough. The thick black body came sliding toward me. It was too fast this time, and I was forced to leap onto the display case, breaking through the glass lid. My hand squished into a lizard's bowl, and the little creature nipped at my thumb. I yanked my arm out of the case and cut it on broken glass. "There you are!" Deadeyes shouted and flung the whole weight of his back half against me. It knocked me over to the shelf of lizard displays on the opposite side. The small end of his tail hung over the glass and draped down my shoulder. It sensed me immediately and curled around my neck. I forced my fingers between my skin and his. I could feel the jerk of his body on the other side of the display shelf, trying to move the bulk of his body toward me, weighed down by the chimpanzee inside his throat. I managed to get my fingers around his tail, and with all my strength, I was able to uncurl it. The small end of the tail grasped for me like an arm, and the thicker parts of his body flexed and bent and dragged his top half nearer. His midsection rose above me, thick as a tree trunk, and came down with all its weight, crushing me beneath it. I could not lift him off or roll away. He grew heavier on top of me. Marlin! A girl's voice screamed as the great iron door to the snake house opened. Deadeye's midsection tensed and slid away, launching toward the door. Oh, Olivia! I shouted. She stood there in the doorway, Kenji perched on her shoulder. She was in shock and stiffly held the key to the snake house in her hand. Who's there? Deadeyes bellowed. He whipped all his weight toward the intruders, sliding toward the door where Olivia remained frozen. I jumped to my feet, sprinted 5 paces toward Deadeyes, and kicked him full force in the face. His head reeled back from the blow and his jaw flailed horribly. I leaped over 3 or 4 layers of writhing flesh and tackled Olivia, gripping the unbroken exterior handle and pulling it shut behind me. Behind it, Deadeyes screamed. Chapter 30. That was a snake, Olivia said in shock. We'd landed on the grimy stones and she was underneath me. Her face was red and dusted with dirt. Little streams of clean skin descended from her eyes where she'd been crying. I shuffled off her and pulled us both up to sitting. She looked disoriented and had trouble focusing on me. Olivia, I stammered, putting my hands on her shoulders. She turned to me and her mouth opened in a soft shape, but she didn't say anything. She looked at me uncertain. I hugged her and she sighed. It's, okay, I said. Okay. Her arms came around my back and pulled me tighter to her. I regretted acting angry with her the night before. Both of our fathers had done terrible things, and she couldn't change what hers had done any more than I could change mine. It's scary out there, Marlin, she said with her chin on my shoulder. The animals broke their cages. No, I said. What were you doing locked in there? Olivia asked, pulling away. That thing could have killed you. My father. I lowered my head. He put you in there? Olivia asked. I don't understand, Marlin. Why would he do that? I couldn't answer her. My mother and father are missing, she said. Everyone went to the Great Hall to hide, but my parents never arrived, so I left to look for them. Kenji came up to me with these keys and she started pulling at me and screeching and led me here. How did she know you were in trouble? I turned to Kenji and put out my hand. She scampered over and scaled my arm to my shoulder. I kissed her on the cheek and said, Thank you, my friend. Of course, Kenji shrieked. Kenji went to get help. What did you think I was doing? Getting help, of course, I laughed. I knew you wouldn't leave me. Yeah, you know better than that. Olivia turned to Kenji and me. What are you doing? I turned back to her. Nothing. We really should go, Master Marlin, Kenji whispered. Chimps are prowling. I nodded and helped Olivia to my feet. Great Hall, I managed, and tried to pull Olivia westward, but she pulled back. Marlin, I have to find my parents. She was scared, but the fight hadn't left her. She couldn't leave without them, and I wouldn't leave without her. Okay, I said. So we turned south, up the Golden Path, into the zoo. Chapter 31. The speckled bear cage was open and empty, with no sign of where Mala and Vashti had gone. Likewise in the boar den, Tuscus, Greybeard, and Bellywart were gone, and the door to the pen was swinging in the wind. But the bush dogs exhibit was untouched. All 5 dogs howled at me. Let us out! Let us out too! The gate to the tapir pond was still bolted, and Bottleby and Longsnout hid themselves in the water. There seemed to be no logic to it. Ahoy down there, Marlin! Some calls came from above our heads. I looked up to see Edo and Bill, the 2 toucans, circling at my head along with Tappet, the bird of paradise. Be careful there, Marlin, Tappet chirped. Olivia was looking up at the squawking birds as well. She already seemed a little scared of the attention they were giving us, and I couldn't blame her with the state the zoo was in. Hey, you guys, come down here, Kenji hooted, throwing her hands in the air. Master Marlin needs your help. The 3 birds spiraled down through the air and landed on the ground in front of us. Olivia jumped back at the strange sight as Tappet and Edo hopped forward. What can we do for you, Marlin? Yes, Bill echoed. We owe you one after you helped out him. He cocked his head toward Tappet. Helping out with who? Tappet demanded, jumping up and down. No one, Edo said. No one, Bill agreed. I didn't want to frighten Olivia further by chatting with the birds right in front of her, but there were chimps on the loose and I didn't know what else to do. All our animals could be dangerous when panicked, and panic was ruling the day. Explaining myself to Olivia would have to come second. We're looking for some people, I said. People? We've seen people everywhere, Edo said. They've been making a racket worse than him, Bill said. Worse than who? Tappet squawked. No one, said Edo. No one, Bill repeated. Listen to me, I shouted at them. I'm looking for a man and a woman. The man is big, with a pointy silver beard. The woman, well, she looks like her, but taller. I turned around and pointed at Olivia. I don't know what kind of madman I must have seemed to her, but I didn't care. You're sure that's not her right there? Tappet asked. Yes, I am, I said, but she looks like her. Said Edo, turning to Bill. Bill responded. Sorry, but no. They both said together. I stood up and looked at Kenji, shaking my head. Marlin? Olivia asked me delicately. What are you doing with those birds? Before I could summon up an answer, a trumpet call through the night. It was accompanied by the stomping of feet on stone that grew louder and nearer from behind a stand of trees. What's that? Asked Edo. What's that? Bill echoed him. That's an elephant, I think, said Tappet. An elephant? Bill and Edo repeated, jumping into the air. The birch trees lining the path next to the empty boar den burst into splinters. Dreyfus smashed through them in a frenzied gallop. He barreled down the path toward where we were standing, rattling the stones underneath him with every thundering step. He trumpeted in panic and shook his wide gray head. A flaming torch was tied to the end of his trunk, swinging side to side and setting trees to flame. Olivia screamed as he charged us, and Kenji scaled my back and wrapped her paws around my neck. Bill, Edo, and Tappet scattered in all directions. Dreyfus galloped right at us, and Olivia tried to pull me off the path, but I pushed her away. Go! I said. Dreyfus broke his stride within inches of me and reared up, kicking his forelegs in the air as smoke streamed from his trunk. Dreyfus! I shouted. Stop! His dirty toe caught me in the chin and knocked me back on the path. He was standing at his full height above me, and a tower of smoke extended to the sky. He looked like an enormous puppet being held by a string. When he came down, I had to roll between the wrinkled pillars of his legs to avoid getting smashed. Tim's trick! I called to him, remembering the circus bit they'd performed. Let me up! Dreyfus bent his knee and lowered his head. Marlin, help me, he gasped. The burning torch was under his face, and hot smoke burned his eyes. I climbed his knee and grabbed hold of his tusk. A smoldering piece of ash touched his skin, and he reared back in pain, nearly tossing me. I lifted my stomach onto his tusk and put my foot into his mouth to hoist myself over his head. When I was up, I lay flat on my tummy between his eyes and secured my feet in the crooks of his eyes. Take it off, he moaned as the torch shifted up his trunk. It'd been there lashed with a length of hemp and was now riding up the trunk. I unhooked my toes from the crooks of his ears and took a bumpy ride down to the end of the trunk. Smoke was streaming into my eyes now, and I had to reach around the flame to feel the strands of hemp wrapped around each other. The heat hurt my pain, and my right palm was screaming with pain. Still, I probed behind the torch with my hands, while my legs were wrapped around his trunk, my feet in his mouth. I tried to lift the torch away from his skin, but couldn't find a loose end in the hemp. Still, I sensed it had some give. Desperate, I pulled the torch farther up his trunk and let it fall on Dreyfus's skin. He shrieked, but it gave me the slack I needed to pull the tangle of hemp into the fire. It crackled, and in an instant burned away, dropping the torch and me to the golden path below. I fell on my back as Olivia stamped out the flames with her boot sole. She pulled me up, and my vision was spinning slightly. All the trees along the golden path were now raging with fire. Red smoke clouds formed in the sky. Dreyfus collapsed and extended his tongue to me. What happened to you? I gasped. The apes, he moaned. They opened my gate, and when I wouldn't go with them, they tied the torch to me and lit it. I clamped my aching right palm between my armpit and leaned against him. You have to get out of here, I said. The apes have gone mad. It isn't safe. Dreyfus blinked the smoke out of his teary eyes. I saw the sensitive skin on his trunk turning red, and was relieved I'd gotten the torch off it before the burn was too serious. His skin hadn't made contact with the flames for long. It was mostly the smoke and the heat that had panicked him. A voice called from the air. I looked up. It was Tappet. I found them. I found the woman and the man. I have to go now, I said to Dreyfus, gently stroking his snout. Promise me you'll be safe somewhere. I will, the elephant said, getting up and shaking out his ears. But where are you going? I turned to Olivia, who was now standing at my side, shaking. I took her by the hand and said in the animal tongue, We have people to find. Chapter 32. We trailed off after Tappet at a sprint, breaking off the golden path and dodging between buildings and exhibits. The destruction Dreyfus had wrought was everywhere. Smashed trees and fences, fire spreading through broken branches and wooden structures. I was thankful that our animal exhibits were all metal and stone and wouldn't burn, but the trees and fences all around gave off a monstrous heat and plumes of smoke that drove the animals still trapped in the cages mad with fear. They called for me to help them, but Father had taken my keys when he locked me in the snake house. We followed Tappet down to the pyramid, to a heavily wooded park at the base, which was dominated by 50-foot tall bitterberry trees. The shrubs at the edges of the park had caught fire, and the wind whipped the flames high. We heard a moaning growl and human screams from within the park. Tappet chirped, In there! Olivia saw them first. Mom! Dad! She shouted and took off. Kenji and I followed her, trying to see where she was headed, but we were far too behind. A roar sounded, and Mala, our 200-pound speckled bear, appeared before Olivia and swiped at her. Olivia stopped short in time and dodged it. That's when I saw them. The Duke and Duchess were part way up a tree, clinging to the branches for dear life. Olivia! The Duke bellowed. Darling! Cried the Duchess. She scrambled away from the bear and back toward me. Mala charged for a few paces and roared. Speckled bears are mostly vegetarians and wouldn't think of hurting a human even if they were starving. But Mala foamed and roared and reared up on her hind legs. When Olivia was far enough back, she turned and refocused herself on the tree that the Duke and the Duchess were in. Mala screamed, Get away from him! And leaped up on the trunk. She tried to climb to where the Duke and Duchess were cowering, but all around the base of the tree were stumps from broken branches, and the bear couldn't get a foothold. Run away, Olivia! The Duchess screamed. Go! Called the Duke. Mala roared and clawed at the base of the tree. You get away from them! She bellowed. She leaped up against the trunk and gained traction with her claws, snapping at the Duchess's feet and pulling off a white leather boot. Mala, stop! I shouted, coming up behind her. She turned at me and snarled, Leave me alone, Marlin! Where is Vashti? I called to her. What are you doing out there, boy? The Duke shouted at me. Get Olivia out of here. Bring help! The Duchess shrieked. I went up closer to the tree. The flame from the shrubs had caught onto the bitter berry trees at the edges, and the smoke was clouding the treetops. Is Vashti up there? I said to Mala as she chomped at a branch below the Duchess's feet. The boy is mad, the Duchess cried. Olivia, you must run! I heard twigs cracking behind me, and then Olivia was at my side. Kenji perched on her shoulder. Marlin will help you, Mother. You need to trust him. I turned to look at her. She didn't think I was crazy. Please, Marlin, she begged me. I nodded and ran up to the base of the tree below the bear. Is Vashti up there? I called to Mala, who had climbed up a few feet above my head. She looked down at me and roared, Go away! I couldn't see the top of the tree because of all the smoke. But I knew the only thing that would drive her up to this. I grabbed hold of the broken stub of a branch and pulled myself onto the trunk. There was splintered wood everywhere, but the tree was sticky with sap, and it made my grip stronger. I pulled myself higher until my head was at Mala's belly. When I reached the level of her face, she snapped at me. Marlin, stay away from him! Her jaws clamped on a branch where my hand had just been. She clawed at me and tore the shoulder of my shirt, drawing blood. I will not hurt Vashti, I screamed at her. When you thought he was lost, that he wasn't your cub, I found him for you. I brought him back for you. The bear's face contorted for an instant in recognition. It was the second I needed to grab hold of the Duchess's bare foot and pull myself up to a higher branch. Oh! She screamed, kicking at me with her other heel. Mala's mothering instinct overpowered her again. and she swiped at me, barely missing my guts. Help him up, Mother! Olivia screamed furiously from below. The Duke grabbed hold of my shoulder and hoisted me up to the branch where they were teetering. He lost his balance, and I grabbed his belt. For a moment, I entertained the thought of letting go. It would be better for the world if Guyana had one less ravisher. He looked at me fearfully and flailed for support. The fate was in my hands. The animals would be saved, the jungle preserved, and my father avenged. And like my father, I would be a murderer. I pulled the Duke back toward the safety of the tree trunk and grabbed the branch above me. I hoisted myself up beyond the Duke and Duchess of Bradshire, but made sure to put a foot on either of their heads for a boost. Ow! Watch it! They screamed, and I ascended, smiling. High up in the tree, through the haze of the smoke, I saw Vashti. He had climbed far up into the tree to get away from whatever had scared him, but he let me lift him off the branch and tuck him under one arm. The Bradshires made for excellent ladders on the way down. My boots marked their white clothing brilliantly. My baby! Mala moaned as I handed Vashti down to her, setting the cub gently on her head. She dropped off the trunk of the tree, picked Vashti up by the nape of his neck, and trotted off with him through the trees and away from the fire. The Duke and Duchess slid to the ground, much less gracefully, and Olivia ran to them. The family pulled together, all crying with relief. Kenji and I surveyed the scene from a respectful distance. But I did overhear Olivia comforting her mother. It's all right, she said. We're with Marlin now.